Hi, I'm Sally Kirkman, and I'm here with Christina Rodenbeck. We're from sallykirkman.com and oxfordastrologer.com websites. And you'll know us through our regular monthly Astrology Talk podcast. And we're trying something new, Astrology Investigates. We're looking at some interesting charts, different people, different events, to see what we can glean from the astrology. And today we're going to be taking a look at a fictional character, someone you probably all know, Sherlock Holmes. So what are we going to have a look at, Christina, regarding one of the top detectives, fictional detectives, Sherlock Holmes?
Well, just in case you haven't heard of Sherlock Holmes.
Okay.
Sherlock Holmes was invented by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, a great writer. And he produced a lot of short stories which were serialized in basically pulp fiction, starting in the 1880s. And right up until, I don't know what the last one was, 1920s, I think. But he kept on trying to get rid of Holmes because he was so sick of writing about him that he wanted to kill him off. So he killed him off once, but then he's resurrected and he comes back again. For Holmes fans, of which I am one, actually, I really love those stories. All know that he lives at 221B Baker Street with his mate, Dr. Watson, who comes to live with him after having, I think that Watson was a doctor and he was a military doctor, maybe in Afghanistan. He comes to live with Holmes, and then he starts writing these stories about this incredibly fascinating person that he lives with, who is a chemist, a junkie. He's got I think it's a heroin habit, or is it a cocaine habit? People will be writing in because, of course, this is a great fandom. People will be furious if we get this wrong. But and a detective. So people bring their cases to him in his little flat. Mrs. Hudson lets them in. Sorry, that's my cat. I'm going to have to just pause this or get rid of him or get him to stop meowing. It's when I say Sherlock. Yeah, no, he's just purring now. Okay. So it's this one of the great characters in literature is Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, and there's he has, he's been reincarnated many times, hasn't he? And many people have played Sherlock Holmes and appears in all kinds of, films to this day. And also there's a huge fandom around him. Is fandom the right word? I hope so. Yeah. But he's got massive fans. So they, this is what we're kind of wanting to investigate a little, isn't it? Because they celebrate Sherlock Holmes' birthday.
Which is never mentioned, can I just say, in any of the books when his actual birthday was. So I find that quite interesting.
There is an age for him, isn't there? Because he's mentioned as being 60 in one of the books. So they've worked out the birth year. But yeah, the birth date, the actual birth date isn't mentioned in any of the writings. And there's some lovely theories around why January the 6th, 1854, is apparently the chart of Sherlock Holmes.
That's when the fandom, which celebrates his birthday, and the first fan club was set up in the 1920s, I think, by this, and they chose this birthday, not Conan Doyle. I have put up a chart for January the 6th. First of all, January the 6th makes him Capricorn, right? And you and I would immediately say, well, he's a detective. Where's the Scorpio in this chart, right? Yeah. So I thought I have to set it up with at least Scorpio rising to make some sense of because Scorpio is the sign that we do associate with analysis, investigation, detection, looking deeply into things. And Scorpio, the planet Pluto as well. We would want that to be strong or somehow very evident in a chart. So I just set it for 3 a.m., which is randomly chosen by me. There is no evidence that he was born at 3 a.m. I vaguely had a notion that it may say somewhere that he was born at night, but I couldn't find it.
Okay, and I mean, I think the one nod towards Pluto, Scorpio being important in this chart is that Pluto was at 0 degrees of Taurus, so it had just moved in to a new star sign, but it's a bit weak and nebulous, isn't it? It's not, and it doesn't
bounce for me, this chart. And I think that's quite interesting. I mean, I don't think that he feels like a Capricorn particularly. He's very he's an interesting mixture of intuition and practical science, because of course one of the things that's different about Sherlock Holmes is that he's using forensics. So he's collecting, he's finding the fingerprints, he's collecting cigar ash, he's noticing what kind of soil is on people's shoes. All of that kind of very detailed stuff. And this doesn't strike me as particularly Capricorn Sagittarius combination, which this chart is.
Yeah, I mean, it puts Mars in Virgo.
That's helpful.
That's sifting through the details. It's kind of that eye for the detail, isn't it? That Mars in Virgo. They're often very good at kind of design and the minutiae of matters. Mars in Virgo. I mean, it is quite an earthy chart, I suppose, but I don't know. I mean, there's the reasons for it being January the 6th are very nebulous, one of which is that the guy who decided the date, I think he was called Christopher Morley, it's his brother's birthday. So,
and apparently Conan Doyle mentions Twelfth Night of Christmas twice in the Chronicles of Sherlock Holmes, which seems to me an incredibly nebulous reason to use this.
The other thing I thought was interesting, because we were reading up about it, is that it said an astrologer at the time had suggested that Sherlock Holmes would be born in January. And I'm thinking, well, what astrologer would have said that? And who was that? But of course, we can't really find that out. That's lost in the mists of time.
I actually do think that he feels quite Aquarian. So maybe that's what that astrologer was thinking. The other end of January, not the beginning of January, but the end of January. Would make more sense. I mean, one thing about the earthiness is that he is very much his form of detection is very much about matter. It's about material things. It's not like he makes, and he does make connections between. He is quite Aquarian, so that's maybe where that astrologer was coming from, not from this. I have got some other charts for us to look at, though, which may be more revealing of, they may tell us more. So let's just see if I can find my dear friend, Mr. Conan Doyle, who has the most fantastic writer's chart. If you want to see a really successful, I'm not saying that he would have to be a successful writer, but I'm so glad that he did, because this is a great writer's chart. He's got a huge 12th house, which is the house of imagination. He's got Gemini rising. He actually has Aquarius on the midheaven, so that's again rather Aquarian. The thing that we know him for is this detective who, according to the 6th of Jan chart, is Capricorn, but actually has a lot of Aquarian stuff around him. His coolness, he's very cool. Sherlock Holmes, he's cold. He doesn't have good, intimate relationships. He has trouble dealing with people. He gets very bored if he hasn't got problems to solve. I feel this is all quite Aquarian. And I noticed that Conan Doyle's moon is in Aquarius. And also, we're pretty sure this chart is very accurate, the birth time.
I mean, it's look at all that Gemini and Virgo are the writing signs, both ruled by Mercury. And he's got a Sun-Uranus conjunction in Gemini. He's got Mars and Jupiter in Gemini on the ascendant. I mean, he was born to communicate and write, wasn't he? And a lot of the stories are short stories. Is that right? So there's a brevity.
they're short stories. They're written for these pulp magazines. I mean, and he's a master of the short story form. So he manages to set a problem at the beginning of the story and resolve it by the end of the story, which is just a really marvelous thing. And they're incredibly sort of satisfying as these nuggets of information, of pleasure, of little puzzles, so you get set these little puzzles, which I think is really charming. And I do feel that's very much this Sun Uranus conjunction in Gemini is like, let me set you a word puzzle,
And also, I mean, this, Scorpio, there's no planets in Scorpio, but he's got Mercury, his writing planet, conjunct Pluto. Scorpio's planet. So that Mercury Pluto as well is that, that's his detective writing, isn't it? That's his getting his detective hat on and becoming Sherlock Holmes as he writes these stories. So it's a lovely chart. It's a really lovely chart for the creator of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, this chart just bounces so much more than the so-called Sherlock Holmes chart. It feels so right, there he is. And also, of course, he was a great... he was very interested in spiritualism. He was a member of the Psychical Research Society, or whatever it was called, in London. He was interested in mediums, etc. And all that fits with this 12th house Pluto Mercury conjunction. The sun in the 12th is that he wants to find out stuff. He wants to look at the other side. If you were going to describe a detective, you would say, "Oh, Pluto Mercury conjunction. That would be a good detective, wouldn't it?"
Yeah.
It's
absolutely.
that and the fact that it's forensic. The word forensic, I think, is important. I also like this. The moon in Aquarius again. That's quite a detached moon, and that much more describes Sherlock Holmes's character. Is rather he's very detached, that's why he has to get the game's afoot, Watson. That's why he has to get his deerstalker on, and off they go. He has trouble engaging with real life, which also you see with this very, very 12th house person.
Yeah, I mean, 12th house, I kind of often think you get people who like to sort of almost, if you're writing, scribbling yourself away writing, there is a retreat, isn't there? A retreat nature of being a writer. But also, I mean, in Conan Doyle's chart, water, the emotional connecting realm is missing. There's Neptune's in Pisces, but that's generational. There's no planets or key angles in water at all. So, to have this, to be writing about this aloof detective.
Cold. He describes him as cold. I think, let me just see if I have this description handy. From how he's described by Watson initially. I think it's really funny. So he meets, the first story was called A Study in Scarlet, which I think was quite interesting. We don't have an exact date for that, unfortunately. Otherwise, we would have got a chart for that up. It's November when it was first published. It was November 1887, I think.
Okay. So probably when the sun was in Scorpio.
Yeah, exactly. The sun was in Scorpio. And so for me, he's a Scorpio Aquarius person, Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, and I like also it's a study in Scarlet. I mean, Mars, the red planet's on Conan Doyle's Gemini ascendant as well. That's like the study in Scarlet. That's where we'll start. We'll start with the study in Scarlet. That will be the first one.
So Watson, who is the writer, so that's the other thing that's great about this, is it's about Conan Doyle being a Gemini, right? Is that it's two people. There's two of them. There's Watson, the sidekick, who's doing the actual writing, and Holmes. So we could say that for the writer has to be both Watson and Holmes. He's doing two sides of his own character, which is classic Gemini. You've got these two sides. They're rather stodgy, because Watson is rather stodgy, and a bit serious, and Sherlock Holmes is like this incredible Uranian bright spark.
Yeah.
So one side is the Taurus side, with the Mercury and the Pluto and Taurus, and one side is this Gemini Uranian side, which is the Sherlock. But Watson describes, says about Sherlock Holmes' knowledge. He lists these characteristics: knowledge of literature, nil; knowledge of philosophy, nil; knowledge of astronomy, nil; knowledge of politics, feeble; knowledge of botany, variable; well up on belladonna, opium, and poisons generally; knows nothing of practical gardening. Knowledge of geology, practical but limited; knowledge of chemistry, profound; knowledge of anatomy, accurate but unsystematic. He says this from the point of view of a doctor. Remember, Watson's a doctor. And Conan Doyle was a doctor as well. Knowledge of sensational literature, immense.
Yeah.
He appears to know every detail of horror perpetrated in this century. Plays the violin well. Is an expert single-stick player, boxer, and swordsman. Has good practical knowledge of British law. So that doesn't necessarily, this is what Watson's description is, but then that doesn't necessarily tell you great detective really there. But it's interesting that he has very kind of limited but specific, rather the things he knows about, he knows incredibly well. And sometimes he doesn't bother knowing about it all.
Yeah.
Which is also very Scorpio, isn't it? It's like being an absolute expert on one thing and knowing nothing about some other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Which fits more that Mercury Pluto for me, because Geminis know about, Geminis, their knowledge is wide, and isn't it? Wide and superficial sometimes, or light, maybe.
Well, and Conan Doyle had to have that, didn't he? Because he's writing the stuff, and he's being Watson, and he's creating the problems.
Yeah.
And he's being Watson and Sherlock Holmes. So I love this chart for a writer and an inventor of a detective and an inquisitive, curious person.
No, it's great. I agree.
I've got another chart, and this is for you, Sally, because...
Yes, thank you. because I, the books, I think I read some of them back in the day. I mean, we're talking back in the day, but I know Sherlock Holmes through the TV series with Benedict Cumberbatch as Sherlock, Martin Freeman as Watson, and the wonderful Andrew Scott as Moriarty. And I'm sure a lot of people kind of listening in here will know Sherlock Holmes through this as well. And this is, so we had a look at Benedict's chart. And one thing to say about this is the time, it's 12 noon. So there is a time that's been given for him, but it's not that accurate, is it? We don't know how accurate it is. But what's super interesting, I think, about this chart is that when you draw it up for 12 noon, it puts Pluto, the detective planet, on Benedict Cumberbatch's ascendant. So kind of rising when he was born. So I think, because of him taking on this role of Sherlock, I mean, I love the fact that Pluto's on the ascendant.
Yeah. So this is the chart from astro.com, and I can't remember what the rating is for this, but what you always have to be suspicious when a chart says 12 noon. You think, really? But maybe it is. I have had clients born at 12 noon or 12:01. Yeah. So people, somebody's got to be born then, but you do question. I mean, the other obvious thing is the North Node in Scorpio with this, with his chart. There's this detection, and that's the thing that's going to make him. It made him. Was it the part that really made him famous? That Cumberbatch.
I don't know. I wouldn't know about that. I mean, he has been quite prolific, hasn't he, as an actor?
Yeah.
He's done a lot. He's kind of one of those chameleon Cancerian actors, actually, who they can reflect and turn into many different roles. So I don't know about that. But it is one that I think a lot of people perhaps know him as. And this is the interesting thing with astrology, isn't it? If you're an actor or a writer, your characters often show in your chart. You can see them. They're aspects of who you are. And you can see why you may be drawn towards playing certain actors or certain characters.
I noticed that he seems to have the moon in Aries, probably.
Yes.
Which is pretty good for an actor, actually, because it means you're just channeling the stuff. If you can find that, it's like a shamanic thing. If you can find that part, then it can just roll through you. Instead of, there's the kind of actor who has to sort of really work at it and do the method, maybe. And then there's the kind of actor who just like opens the lid and lets it come through. And I'm thinking Cumberbatch is probably that kind. Oh, he's fantastic in Power of the Dog. I was thinking, what have I seen him in that I really liked?
Oh, that was fantastic. I loved him in that. I mean, I think it wasn't Moon in Aries in The Birth Date for Sherlock Holmes as well.
Yeah. Which again, I find quite surprising for Moon in Aries for a detective. But anyway, I think he has got Moon in Aries in that 6th of January chart.
I mean, in Cumberbatch's chart, it is opposite Uranus as well. So the moon's his career planet, if the time is correct, opposite Uranus. And he does. So he's quite unusual looking, isn't he? There's a quirkiness and an oddness about him. And he can kind of portray these odd characters quite well.
He's not handsome. I mean, he's not a handsome guy. He's no Tom Cruise, right? He's weird looking. And I think that is part of his USP. He has an incredible voice, Cumberbatch. I mean, that is his real power, I think, he's got a very, very beautiful voice.
Yeah.
And I'm just looking at his chart thinking, where is that? Maybe North Node in the 2nd house or...
Mercury-Venus conjunction in Leo.
Yeah.
You think beautiful voice? That speaks beautiful voice to me.
It does. I'm just looking at what Saturn's doing with that as well, because it's actually Mercury, Venus, Saturn conjunction.
It is.
And one of the things that's interesting about him is that he first came to my attention when he was on the radio, and he was in a very wonderful series. It's a really funny series about pilots. It's a comedy, but he sounds incredibly old if you don't know what he looks like. And he was obviously very young when he was playing that chart. And I thought he was a man of about, in his 50s. And he must have been 22,
Yeah.
And I think that is a beautiful old voice.
Yeah. Yes, Venus, Mercury,
Saturn together in Leo.
Yeah, it adds gravitas, doesn't it, Saturn? It adds a gravitas to your nature. That's fascinating.
So do we think he's a great detective? I think he's probably not a great detective, but a very good actor.
Yeah, I agree. Mars in Virgo again.
Yeah, and it's great to have a really good actor's chart and a really good writer's chart here, and an iffy detective's chart. I would sum up. You think?
I think we, the Astrology Investigates, have confirmed that is not the birth date of Sherlock Holmes, 1854. We would choose another one. We would choose a different date.
Yeah, we would. It would be fun. Next time we should just choose a chart for him, right?
Okay, we'll do that.
Although, I think I might choose Conan Doyle's chart.
Why not?
Looks like it,
Why not? Yeah.
Okay, see you next time.
See you next time. Take care. Bye.